Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome back to this cozy corner of history where we explore the stories that time tried to bury. Tonight, we journey to medieval Europe, where cobblestone streets echoed with both merchant calls and desperate whispers, following a story that will remind us just how precious our modern freedoms and protections truly are. Whether you're nestled under warm blankets ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking to unwind with some gentle historical storytelling, I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this evening with me. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a comfort to see our community of history enthusiasts gathered here from every corner of the globe. And if you find peace in these calm, immersive tales from ages past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey together. But for now, let's allow the gentle weight of modern comfort to settle around you as we travel back to a time and place where the simple right to choose your own path was a luxury beyond imagination for countless women. Tonight, we're walking the narrow lanes of 14th century Nördlingen, following a story that will remind us just how precious our legal protections and personal autonomy truly are. Picture yourself settling deeper into your pillow as we begin this tale of Margrete of Bavaria, a young woman whose name has been lost to most histories, but whose story speaks to the experiences of thousands like her. Close your eyes if you wish, and let your breathing slow as we explore together what it meant to navigate a world where society's contradictions could trap a woman between survival and shame. Take a deep breath with me now, feeling the softness of your bedding, the warmth of your room, the safety of your walls. Hold on to that comfort as we journey back 7 centuries to a world where such simple pleasures were luxuries beyond imagination for those unfortunate enough to find themselves caught in the brutal machinery of medieval prostitution. The year is 1347, and morning light filters weakly through the oiled cloth covering the single window of a cramped room above a baker's shop in Nördlingen. Feel the difference between your clean, comfortable air and the thick atmosphere Margrete awakens to. Air heavy with wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the persistent dampness that seeps through medieval walls. Where you wake to the gentle hum of climate control and the comfort of your choosing, she stirs to the harsh reality of a life that was never truly her own. Margrete's story begins not in the brothel where we'll find her, but in a small village outside Augsburg, where she was born to parents who worked a small plot of land for their lord. Feel grateful for the education systems and opportunities that surround us today, as we remember that Margrete grew up in a world where a peasant girl's options were startlingly limited. She could marry if a suitable man would have her, and if her father could provide a dowry. She could enter a convent if her family could afford the required donation, or she could work as a servant in a wealthier household, always vulnerable to the whims and desires of those above her station. Breathe deeply and appreciate the legal protections that safeguard you as we learn that Margrete's path towards the brothels of Nördlingen began with a single moment of misfortune. At 17, working as a kitchen maid in a merchant's house, she caught the attention of her master's eldest son. What followed was not romance, but exploitation, a pattern as old as humanity itself, where power and vulnerability intersect with devastating consequences for those least able to protect themselves. Rest in the knowledge of your safety as we understand that when Margrete found herself pregnant and dismissed from service, she faced choices that no human being should ever confront. Her family, already struggling to survive, could not support another mouth to feed. The father of her child disclaimed all responsibility, as was his legal right in a society that placed the burden of sexual conduct entirely upon women. Feel thankful for the social services and support systems of our modern world as we follow Margrete's desperate journey to Nördlingen, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the terrible knowledge that survival might require sacrificing everything she had been taught to value about herself. The medieval understanding of prostitution was, like so many aspects of medieval life, tangled in contradictions that revealed both the pragmatism and the cruelty of the age. Church authorities, following the teachings of St. Augustine, proclaimed that prostitution was a necessary evil. Better for sinful men to frequent brothels than to corrupt respectable women with their desires. Feel grateful for our more nuanced understanding of human dignity, as we learn that this theological justification created a system where women like Margrete could be simultaneously essential to social order and completely expendable as human beings. Town councils across medieval Europe embraced this theological reasoning with enthusiasm that had more to do with economics than morality. Municipal brothels generated significant tax revenue, while regulated prostitution promised to keep disorder contained within designated districts. Rest in the knowledge of your own agency as we discover that these legal brothels operated under a veneer of protection that often concealed exploitation as systematic as any in human history. When Margrete first approached the municipal brothel of Nördlingen in the autumn of 1347, she was desperate enough to believe the promises of the brothel keeper, a man named Heinrich Fürst. Feel the security of your financial independence as we learn that Heinrich offered what seemed like salvation to a pregnant woman with nowhere else to turn. Room, board, protection from the streets, and a way to earn money that could perhaps, eventually, buy her freedom and respectability. But let your breathing slow as we discover the reality behind these promises. Like brothel keepers across medieval Europe, Heinrich had perfected a system of control that began the moment a woman entered his establishment. Margrete's few possessions, a wool cloak, a simple kirtle, and a small silver ring that had belonged to her mother, were immediately confiscated and pawned to Jewish merchants in the town. Heinrich explained this as security against the debt she would inevitably incur for room and board, but the true purpose was far more sinister. Feel grateful for the laws that protect workers' rights as we learn that Margrete was given rough-spun clothing barely adequate to cover her body. Other women in the brothel warned her in whispers that Heinrich deliberately kept them in rags to make them dependent on his charity for any decent garments. Those who earned tips or managed to save money found themselves forced to purchase cloth and clothing from Heinrich at prices 3 or 4 times the market rate. Where you can budget and save with confidence, these women lived in a system designed to ensure they could never accumulate enough resources to leave. The daily reality of life in Heinrich's brothel would shock our modern sensibilities with its calculated dehumanization. Feel the comfort of your regular meals as we learn that the women were charged 13 pennies for food that cost 12 pennies elsewhere in town. Every cup of wine cost them a penny more than the market price. When customers wished to stay overnight, the women were charged double the normal sleeping money fee, supposedly to cover the cost of clean linens and the private use of a room. Breathe deeply and appreciate your healthcare access as we discover that pregnant women like Margrete were expected to continue working until the very moment of labor. Medieval brothel keepers viewed pregnancy as an inconvenience that reduced profits, and they had developed various methods for dealing with it. Some women were forced to consume herbal concoctions intended to prevent or terminate pregnancies, mixtures that were often more dangerous than childbirth itself. Rest in the safety of modern medicine as we learn that Margrete gave birth to her daughter in the winter of 1347, attended only by 2 other women from the brothel who had learned basic midwifery from necessity rather than training. The child, a girl Margrete named Anna after her own mother, was healthy despite the circumstances of her birth. For a brief moment, Margrete allowed herself to hope that perhaps she could save enough money to leave the brothel and raise her daughter in a different life. Feel thankful for maternity protections as we discover that Heinrich allowed Margrete exactly 3 days to recover from childbirth before demanding she return to work. When she protested that she was still bleeding and in pain, he threatened to throw both her and the baby out into the winter streets. The other women in the brothel had warned her that this was Heinrich's standard practice. He saw childbirth as a temporary interruption to business, not a life-changing event requiring time and care. Let your breathing deepen as we understand the impossible position Margrete faced. Medieval society offered virtually no support for unmarried mothers, especially those associated with prostitution. Convents might accept repentant prostitutes, but they would never take a woman with a child. Marriage remained a possibility in theory. Some women did manage to save enough for a dowry and find husbands willing to overlook their pasts. But this required years of saving money that brothel keepers like Heinrich made nearly impossible to accumulate. Feel grateful for your freedom of movement as we learn about the various restrictions placed on medieval sex workers. In many towns, they were required to wear distinctive clothing, yellow stripes or red trim, that marked them as prostitutes wherever they went. They were forbidden from attending church during certain hours, prevented from living in respectable neighborhoods, and often banned from the marketplace during peak hours when decent women might encounter them. The medieval mind's approach to these restrictions revealed the deep contradictions at the heart of their society. Feel thankful for our more consistent understanding of human rights as we discover that the same authorities who declared prostitution necessary for social order also created laws designed to humiliate and isolate the women who provided this supposedly essential service. They were simultaneously indispensable and untouchable, vital to the community's moral health and completely excluded from the community's moral consideration. Margrete's days in Heinrich's brothel followed a rhythm as predictable as it was soul-crushing. Rest in the knowledge of your own schedule's freedom as we learn that she rose before dawn to help with cooking and cleaning, work that was unpaid but mandatory. The brothel operated like an inn, serving food and drink to customers who might or might not purchase sexual services, and the women were expected to contribute their labor to every aspect of the business. Feel the comfort of your leisure time as we discover that Margrete's mornings were spent scrubbing floors with cold water and harsh soap that left her hands cracked and bleeding. Medieval cleaning methods relied on abrasive substances like sand and ash that wore away at both dirt and skin. The women took turns hauling water from the town well, a task made more difficult by the heavy wooden buckets and the distance they had to carry them. Breathe deeply and appreciate your modern conveniences as we learn that the brothel's sanitation was primitive, even by medieval standards. A shared privy in the courtyard served all the residents, and bathing was a weekly event at best, using cold water heated laboriously over the kitchen fire. The smell of unwashed bodies, stale wine, and human waste permeated everything, creating an atmosphere that marked these women as clearly as any legal requirement for distinctive clothing. Let your muscles relax as we understand that Margrete's afternoons and evenings were spent entertaining customers in a cramped room that contained nothing but a straw mattress, a wooden stool, and a basin for washing. The walls were thin enough that she could hear every conversation, every cry of pain or pleasure, every moment of violence or tenderness occurring in the adjacent rooms. Feel grateful for your privacy as we learn that such intimate moments became public performances, stripped of any possibility for genuine human connection. Feel thankful for labor protections as we discover that Heinrich required the women to be available to any customer who could pay, regardless of their own feelings or physical condition. Medieval law viewed prostitutes as having forfeited the right to refuse sexual encounters, and brothel keepers enforced this principle with casual brutality. Women who attempted to turn away customers were beaten, fined, or denied food until they submitted to Heinrich's authority. Rest in the knowledge of your bodily autonomy as we learn that Margrete quickly discovered the unwritten rules of survival in this environment. Customers who paid extra could demand services that left her injured and humiliated. Those who appeared drunk or violent had to be managed carefully. Refusing them might bring Heinrich's wrath, but submitting to them might result in serious injury or death. Other women in the brothel shared whispered advice about which customers to fear and which might show some measure of kindness or restraint. Feel grateful for modern medical knowledge as we understand that disease was a constant threat in medieval brothels. Syphilis, though not yet widespread in Northern Europe, would arrive within a few decades and devastate communities of sex workers who had no understanding of how sexually transmitted infections spread. Even without syphilis, women faced constant risk of other sexually transmitted diseases that medieval medicine could neither diagnose nor treat effectively. Let your breathing slow as we learn that Margrete's greatest fear was not disease or violence, but the possibility that her daughter Anna might grow up to follow her path. Heinrich made it clear that children born in the brothel would eventually be expected to contribute to the household economy. Boys might be apprenticed to trades if they showed promise, but girls faced a future that seemed inevitably tied to the brothel's business model. Feel thankful for educational opportunities as we discover that Margrete began teaching Anna her letters using charcoal and scraps of wood, hoping that literacy might offer her daughter possibilities that had never existed for herself. This was dangerous. Heinrich disapproved of activities that didn't contribute to immediate profits, and educated women were viewed with suspicion in a society that valued female obedience over female intelligence. Rest in the safety of your community as we understand that the other women in Heinrich's brothel became Margrete's only source of emotional support and practical guidance. They shared what little food they could save, took turns caring for each other's children, and created a shadow economy of mutual aid that helped them survive Heinrich's systematic exploitation. These relationships, forged in desperation and maintained through shared suffering, provided the only genuine human warmth available in their constrained world. Feel grateful for your social connections as we learn that the women developed their own language of gestures and coded phrases to communicate warnings about dangerous customers, share information about Heinrich's moods, and offer comfort during moments of particular despair. They celebrated each other's small victories. A customer who paid fairly, a day without violence, a letter received from family members who hadn't completely severed contact. Breathe deeply and appreciate your legal protections as we discover that the women had virtually no recourse when Heinrich's exploitation became particularly brutal. Medieval law offered prostitutes minimal protection, even from violence that would have been punished if directed against respectable women. Town authorities might intervene if brothel disturbances threatened public order, but they showed little interest in the welfare of individual sex workers. The seasonal rhythms of medieval life affected the brothel in ways that reflected the broader economic patterns of the era. Feel thankful for economic stability as we learn that winter months brought fewer traveling merchants and reduced income for everyone in Heinrich's establishment. During these periods, Heinrich's demands became more onerous. He required the women to take on additional spinning and weaving work, paying them barely enough to cover their inflated room and board charges. Rest in the knowledge of your food security as we understand that Heinrich used hunger as a tool of control during difficult economic periods. When the brothel's profits declined, the women's meals became smaller and less frequent. They were given thin gruel and stale bread while watching Heinrich and his family enjoy meat, cheese, and fresh bread at their own table. This constant reminder of their subordinate status served to reinforce their dependence on his questionable generosity. Feel grateful for modern healthcare as we learn that illness posed particular challenges for women in Margrete's position. Medieval medicine offered few effective treatments for common ailments, and brothel keepers typically viewed sick women as temporary losses rather than human beings deserving care. Heinrich's approach was to minimize the cost of medical attention while maximizing the speed with which women returned to profitable work. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Margrete fell seriously ill during the winter of 1349, likely suffering from what we would now recognize as pneumonia. She spent days in a fevered delirium, cared for by the other women who shared their own meager resources to keep her alive. Heinrich grudgingly allowed her to rest only because forcing a visibly sick woman to work might drive away customers who feared contagion. Feel thankful for our understanding of infectious disease as we learn that medieval people had no clear concept of how illness spread from person to person. They attributed disease to supernatural causes, imbalanced bodily humors, or corrupted air, leading to treatments that were often more harmful than helpful. Margrete's recovery was credited to the prayers of her fellow prostitutes rather than the basic nursing care they provided. Rest in the comfort of your support systems as we understand that Margrete's illness revealed both the brutality and the humanity present in her constrained world. Heinrich calculated the cost of her lost labor and threatened to sell her possessions to compensate for reduced profits. But the other women pooled their scanty resources to purchase basic medical supplies and shared their own food rations to help her regain strength. Feel grateful for religious freedom as we learn that medieval prostitutes faced particular challenges in their spiritual lives. Church authorities proclaimed that their profession made them inherently sinful, while simultaneously arguing that their services were necessary to protect virtuous women. They were welcome to attend certain religious services but forbidden from others, creating a theological limbo that reinforced their social marginalization. Breathe deeply and appreciate your dignity, as we discover that many women in Margrete's position found comfort in the figure of Mary Magdalene, who medieval Christianity portrayed as a reformed prostitute. This offered a theological framework for eventual redemption, but it also reinforced the assumption that sex work was inherently shameful and that women who engaged in it required divine forgiveness rather than social justice. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete's relationship with her daughter Anna became the central source of meaning in her constrained life. Feel thankful for your parental rights as we learn that Heinrich increasingly saw Anna as future property rather than as Margrete's child. He made pointed comments about the girl's developing beauty and the profits she might eventually generate. Comments that filled Margrete with a desperation that transcended even her own suffering. Feel grateful for child protection laws as we discover that medieval society offered children in Margrete's position virtually no protection from exploitation. Town authorities might intervene if violence against children became particularly public or extreme, but they showed little interest in preventing the gradual introduction of young people into prostitution. The economic logic of brothel operations encouraged viewing children as investments rather than human beings deserving protection and nurturing. Rest in the knowledge of educational opportunities as we learn that Margrete's attempts to teach Anna reading and arithmetic represented a quiet form of resistance against the future Heinrich envisioned. She shared stories from her own childhood, teaching Anna about the world beyond the brothel's walls and nurturing dreams that might seem impossible but offered psychological sustenance during the darkest moments. Feel thankful for economic mobility as we understand that Margrete began developing a desperate plan for escape during the spring of 1350. She had managed to save a few coins by skipping meals and secretly taking in mending work from other residents of the neighborhood. This required enormous personal sacrifice. Every saved copper meant hunger, cold, or some other deprivation in a life already defined by scarcity. Breathe deeply and appreciate your freedom as we learn that escape from a medieval brothel required careful planning and considerable courage. Heinrich and other brothel keepers had developed sophisticated methods for preventing women from leaving. including debt bondage, confiscation of personal property, and threats of violence. They also maintained networks of contacts who would report sightings of escaped women and return them for small rewards. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Margrete's opportunity came during the chaos of a local festival, when Heinrich's attention was focused on maximizing profits from increased customer traffic. Feel grateful for your mobility as we learn that she gathered Anna and the few possessions she had managed to hide, slipping out of the brothel during the pre-dawn darkness when the streets were empty, except for bakers beginning their daily preparations. Feel thankful for law enforcement, as we understand that Margrete's first priority was reaching the sanctuary of a nearby convent, where traditional medieval law offered some protection from immediate pursuit. But the journey of several miles had to be completed before Heinrich discovered her absence and organized pursuit. She traveled through forests and fields, avoiding main roads where they might be spotted by Heinrich's associates or casual travelers who might report suspicious activity. Rest in the safety of your shelter as we learn that Margrete and Anna spent their first night of freedom hidden in a hay barn, listening to the sounds of pursuit in the distance. Medieval methods of tracking escaped persons were surprisingly sophisticated, relying on networks of informants, knowledge of local terrain, and the reality that two people traveling alone were conspicuous in a society where most movement occurred in organized groups. Feel grateful for social services as we discover that the convent Margrete sought offered limited sanctuary. They would provide temporary shelter, but their resources were stretched thin, and they could not support long-term residents without some form of payment or useful skill. The nuns were sympathetic to Margrete's situation, but constrained by their own economic realities and the social expectations of their religious calling. Breathe deeply and appreciate your legal protections as we learn that Heinrich arrived at the convent within 2 days, accompanied by local authorities who supported his claim that Margrete had stolen property belonging to the brothel. Medieval law heavily favored property owners over workers, and Heinrich's accusations of theft were difficult to disprove without witnesses willing to testify against an established businessman. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete faced an impossible choice: return to Heinrich's brothel and accept whatever punishment he deemed appropriate, or attempt to prove her innocence in a legal system that offered little protection to women in her position. Feel thankful for due process as we learn that medieval courts often operated on assumptions about character and social status rather than careful examination of evidence. Feel grateful for your advocate rights as we discover that the convent's abbess, a woman named Sister Agatha, chose to intervene on Margrete's behalf, despite the potential cost to her institution's relationship with local authorities. Sister Agatha had observed Heinrich's business practices over many years and understood the systematic exploitation that characterized his operations. Even if she could not speak publicly about issues considered beyond the proper concern of religious women, rest in the knowledge of your support systems as we learn that Sister Agatha proposed a compromise that reflected both medieval pragmatism and the limited options available to women in Margrete's position. Margrete would work as a servant in the convent, providing domestic labor in exchange for shelter and basic sustenance for herself and Anna. This arrangement satisfied Heinrich's demand for compensation, while offering Margrete a path away from prostitution. Feel thankful for educational access as we understand that this arrangement allowed Anna to receive basic religious education alongside the other children being raised within the convent's protection. For Margrete, it meant grueling physical labor under strict religious supervision, but it also meant safety from the sexual exploitation that had defined her recent years, and hope that her daughter might have different opportunities. Breathe deeply and appreciate your dignity as we learn that Margrete's transition to convent life was neither simple nor entirely positive. Medieval religious institutions demanded complete submission to authority and offered little space for individual expression or personal relationships. The nuns viewed Margrete's past as requiring constant penance and surveillance, creating a different form of constraint that replaced sexual exploitation with spiritual surveillance. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Margrete found meaning in the simple rhythms of convent life despite its restrictions. Feel grateful for your leisure time as we learn that her days began before dawn with prayers, continued with hours of cleaning, cooking, and textile work, and ended with evening prayers that left little time for personal reflection or relationship with her daughter. Feel thankful for work-life balance as we understand that the convent schedule allowed Margrete only brief moments with Anna during meals and evening prayers. The nuns believed that excessive maternal attachment might interfere with Anna's spiritual development, and they worked to minimize emotional bonds that might distract from religious devotion. This separation was another form of loss in a life already marked by repeated displacement and constraint. Rest in the knowledge of your family rights as we learn that Margrete observed Anna's growth with a mixture of pride and concern. The girl showed intellectual promise that impressed the nuns, but she also displayed an independence of spirit that might create challenges in a medieval society that valued female submission above female intelligence. Margrete worried that Anna's education might create expectations that the world would never allow her to fulfill. Feel grateful for mental health understanding as we discover that Margrete struggled with what we would now recognize as depression and trauma related to her experiences in Heinrich's brothel. Medieval understanding of mental illness was limited and heavily influenced by religious interpretations that attributed emotional distress to spiritual weakness rather than understandable responses to trauma and loss. Breathe deeply and appreciate medical knowledge as we learn that the convent's approach to Margrete's emotional struggles focused on increased prayer, fasting, and physical labor rather than emotional support or therapeutic conversation. The nuns viewed her periods of sadness and withdrawal as evidence of insufficient commitment to spiritual transformation, rather than natural consequences of the exploitation and violence she had experienced. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete found solace in small acts of resistance and creativity within the convent's structured environment. Feel thankful for creative expression as we learn that she taught herself to embroider elaborate designs on the religious vestments she was assigned to repair, finding in needlework a form of artistic expression that was both approved by religious authorities and personally meaningful. Feel grateful for privacy as we discover that Margrete's needlework sessions provided rare opportunities for unguarded conversation with Anna and the other women working in the convent's textile workshop. These moments of connection helped sustain her emotional health and created space for the kind of intimate human relationship that both the brothel and the convent's official structures worked to prevent. Rest in the safety of your relationships as we learn that Margrete gradually developed cautious friendships with some of the nuns who had themselves experienced poverty and limited options before entering religious life. These women understood the economic desperation that drove women like Margrete into prostitution, even if their religious training prevented them from questioning the social systems that created such limited choices. Feel thankful for your voice as we understand that Margrete's presence in the convent created quiet conversations about the treatment of women in medieval society, discussions that were never officially acknowledged but influenced the nuns' approach to other women seeking sanctuary from exploitation and violence. Her story became part of an informal oral tradition that helped shape how the religious community understood their mission of providing shelter to society's most vulnerable members. Breathe deeply and appreciate your healthcare as we learn that Margrete's health gradually improved during her years in the convent, as adequate nutrition and reduced stress allowed her body to recover from the physical toll of her time in Heinrich's brothel. Medieval understanding of the connection between emotional well-being and physical health was limited, but the nuns observed that former prostitutes often experienced dramatic health improvements when removed from exploitative situations. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Anna's education progressed remarkably within the convent's protective environment. Feel grateful for educational opportunity as we learn that she demonstrated particular talent for languages and mathematics, skills that impressed visiting scholars and suggested possibilities beyond the limited roles typically available to women of her background. Feel thankful for your options as we understand that Anna's intellectual gifts created both opportunities and challenges as she approached adolescence. Medieval society offered few acceptable paths for educated women outside of religious life, and the nuns began suggesting that Anna consider taking religious vows as a way of utilizing her abilities while maintaining the protection and respectability that the convent provided. Rest in the knowledge of your choices as we learn that Margrete faced an agonizing decision about Anna's future. She wanted her daughter to have opportunities she had never possessed, but she also feared that pushing Anna toward independence might expose her to the same vulnerabilities and exploitation that had shaped Margrete's own life. The medieval world offered precious few options for women seeking both security and autonomy. Feel grateful for your freedoms as we discover that Margrete ultimately chose to support Anna's desire for education and independence, even knowing the risks this decision entailed. She spent hours teaching Anna practical skills that might help her navigate a dangerous world. How to read people's intentions, how to protect herself from violence, how to save money and manage resources, and how to maintain dignity even in degrading circumstances. Breathe deeply and appreciate your support systems as we learn that Margrete's relationship with Anna deepened during these conversations, as she shared honestly about her experiences while emphasizing that Anna's worth as a human being was not dependent on society's judgments about her background or her mother's past. This represented a radical departure from medieval assumptions about inherited shame and moral contamination. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete lived to see Anna accepted as a teacher in a merchant family's household, a position that offered both economic security and intellectual stimulation. Feel thankful for your opportunities as we learn that Anna's literacy and mathematical skills made her valuable enough that her employers were willing to overlook the circumstances of her birth and upbringing. Feel grateful for your relationships as we discover that Margrete's final years were marked by quiet satisfaction in Anna's success and gradual acceptance within the convent community. The nuns who had initially viewed her with suspicion came to respect her resilience, her contribution to their daily operations, and her gentle influence on other women seeking sanctuary from exploitation and violence. Rest in the knowledge of your dignity as we learn that Margrete died peacefully in 1367, surrounded by the religious community that had become her family and secure in the knowledge that Anna was building a life characterized by independence, respect, and opportunities that had been unimaginable when they first escaped Heinrich's brothel. Her death was marked by genuine mourning from women who had learned to see past social stigma to recognize the courage and humanity she had maintained despite years of systematic dehumanization. Feel thankful for remembrance as we understand that Margrete's story was preserved in the convent's informal oral tradition, passed down through generations of nuns who used her example to understand their mission of providing sanctuary to society's most vulnerable women. While her name appeared in no official histories, her life became part of a collective memory that influenced how religious communities approached questions of redemption, dignity, and social justice. Breathe deeply and appreciate your worth as we learn that Anna eventually married a merchant's clerk and raised children who never knew the full extent of their grandmother's suffering, but inherited her values of resilience, compassion, and fierce protection of human dignity. The skills and perspectives Margrete had taught Anna, literacy, mathematical ability, and emotional intelligence, became part of a family legacy that created opportunities across generations. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Heinrich's brothel was eventually closed by town authorities. not because of concern for the women's welfare, but because of financial irregularities that threatened the municipal tax revenue. Feel grateful for your labor protections as we learn that the women who had been trapped in his establishment faced uncertain futures, with some finding shelter in religious institutions while others disappeared into the unrecorded margins of medieval society. Feel thankful for historical awareness as we understand that Margrete's individual story was repeated thousands of times across medieval Europe, as women facing economic desperation, family crisis, or social displacement found themselves drawn into forms of sex work that promised survival but delivered systematic exploitation. Their experiences reflected broader patterns of gender inequality, economic vulnerability, and legal marginalization that characterized medieval society's treatment of its most vulnerable members. Rest in the knowledge of progress as we learn that the medieval system of regulated prostitution eventually gave way to different approaches that reflected changing economic conditions, religious movements, and social attitudes. While exploitation and trafficking continue to affect vulnerable women today, our understanding of these issues has evolved to recognize the need for comprehensive support services, legal protections, and economic alternatives that were unimaginable in Margrete's time. Feel grateful for your voice as we discover that modern historians have worked to recover stories like Margrete's from archives and legal records that preserved fragments of individual experience within broader historical patterns. These efforts represent a commitment to understanding history from the perspective of ordinary people rather than focusing exclusively on the experiences of political leaders and social elites. Breathe deeply and appreciate your agency as we learn that women throughout history have found ways to maintain dignity, create meaning, and protect their families even within systems designed to exploit and dehumanize them. Margrete's story reminds us that individual resilience and mutual support can provide sustenance even in the darkest circumstances, while also highlighting the importance of social systems that protect rather than exploit human vulnerability. Let your breathing slow as we understand that the distance between Margrete's constrained choices and our contemporary freedoms reflects centuries of struggle by countless individuals who refused to accept that exploitation and inequality were inevitable features of human society. Their efforts created the legal protections, social services, and economic opportunities that many of us now take for granted. Feel thankful for your security as we reflect on how Margrete's desperate search for safety and dignity speaks to universal human needs that transcend historical periods and social circumstances. Her love for her daughter, her longing for respect and autonomy, and her capacity for friendship and spiritual growth remind us of the common humanity that connects us across time and circumstance. Rest in the knowledge of your worth as we consider how Margrete's story challenges us to recognize the full humanity of people whose circumstances or choices might seem foreign to our own experience. Her life demonstrates that wisdom, courage, and moral strength can flourish even in environments designed to suppress them, and that individual acts of kindness and solidarity can provide light in even the darkest historical moments. Feel grateful for your opportunities as we remember that Margrete's fierce determination to secure a better future for Anna reflects parental love that transcends the specific constraints of medieval society. Her willingness to sacrifice her own comfort and safety for her daughter's education and independence created possibilities that rippled forward through generations, influencing lives that she would never know, but whose opportunities were expanded by her courage and vision. Breathe deeply and appreciate your freedom as we understand that stories like Margrete's serve as reminders of both how far human societies have progressed in protecting vulnerable individuals and how much work remains to be done. The economic desperation, gender inequality, and social marginalization that shaped her experiences continue to affect millions of people around the world today. Let your muscles relax as we reflect on how Margrete's friendship with the other women in Heinrich's brothel and her eventual integration into the convent community demonstrate the power of human connection to provide meaning and support even in constrained circumstances. These relationships sustained her through trauma and loss while creating networks of mutual aid that helped other vulnerable women survive and occasionally escape exploitation. Feel thankful for justice systems as we consider how Margrete's story illustrates the importance of legal protections and social services that recognize the dignity and rights of all individuals, regardless of their economic status or life circumstances. Her experience with a legal system that favored property owners over workers reminds us to value and protect institutions that prioritize human welfare over narrow economic interests. Rest in the knowledge of your support as we learn that the convent community's decision to provide sanctuary to Margrete and Anna represented a form of social justice that operated outside official legal and political structures. Their commitment to offering second chances and recognizing the potential for transformation provided hope and practical assistance that changed the trajectory of both women's lives in ways that reverberated across generations. Feel grateful for medical understanding as we discover that the physical and emotional scars Margrete carried from her time in Heinrich's brothel slowly healed within the convent's protective environment. Medieval medicine offered little insight into trauma and its lasting effects, but the nuns observed that former prostitutes often experienced nightmares, sudden fears, and periods of deep sadness that gradually lessened with time, safety, and meaningful work. What we now understand as post-traumatic stress was then attributed to spiritual struggles requiring prayer and patience. Breathe deeply and appreciate your mental health resources as we learn that Margrete found healing not through any formal treatment, but through the simple rhythms of convent life. Regular meals, predictable schedules, meaningful labor, and most importantly, the absence of sexual violence and exploitation. The luxury of sleep without fear, of walking through hallways without bracing for unwanted touch, of eating meals without calculation about the cost in dignity or safety. These basic securities provided the foundation for psychological recovery. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete's integration into the convent community was neither swift nor simple. Feel thankful for your acceptance as we learn that some nuns struggled to see past her history, to recognize her essential humanity and worth. Medieval Christianity offered theological frameworks for redemption and forgiveness, but individual believers often found it difficult to move beyond judgment and suspicion toward genuine welcome and inclusion. Feel grateful for your community as we discover that Margrete gradually earned respect through her tireless work ethic, her gentle manner with visitors seeking help, and her evident devotion to ensuring Anna's welfare and education. The nuns observed that she never sought special treatment or complained about the demanding physical labor required to maintain the convent, approaching each task with a quiet dignity that spoke to her strength of character. Rest in the knowledge of your purpose as we learn that Margrete found particular meaning in caring for other women who arrived at the convent seeking sanctuary from various forms of exploitation and violence. Her own experience with Heinrich's systematic cruelty had taught her to recognize the signs of trauma and abuse, and she developed an intuitive understanding of how to provide comfort and practical guidance to women facing similar transitions. Feel thankful for your voice as we understand that Margrete became an unofficial counselor to women escaping prostitution, offering insights about survival strategies, emotional healing, and the complex process of rebuilding identity after experiences of systematic dehumanization. The nuns recognized her unique qualifications for this work and gradually included her in formal decisions about admitting and supporting vulnerable women seeking shelter. Breathe deeply and appreciate your education as we learn that Margrete's own literacy improved significantly during her convent years, as she worked alongside nuns who valued learning and intellectual development. She progressed from basic reading and writing to more sophisticated understanding of religious texts, legal documents, and commercial correspondence that passed through the convent as part of their economic activities. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Margrete's growing literacy allowed her to help Anna with increasingly advanced studies, while also contributing to the convent's administrative work. Feel grateful for your skills as we learn that her experience with the brutal economics of brothel life had taught her to understand financial calculations and resource management in ways that proved valuable for managing the convent's limited resources and competing demands. Feel thankful for your opportunities as we understand that Anna's education continued to exceed everyone's expectations, demonstrating aptitude not only for languages and mathematics, but also for the kind of practical wisdom that would serve her well in navigating medieval society's complex social hierarchies. The nuns began to see her as potential evidence that children could transcend the circumstances of their birth through education, moral guidance, and supportive community. Rest in the knowledge of your potential as we learn that Anna's intellectual gifts created opportunities for the convent to strengthen relationships with wealthy merchant families who valued educated tutors for their own children. Her reputation for learning and moral character began to spread beyond the convent walls, creating possibilities that seemed impossible when she first arrived as the infant daughter of an escaped prostitute. Feel grateful for your relationships as we discover that the bond between Margrete and Anna deepened during these years of relative stability and safety. They were able to develop the kind of mother-daughter relationship that had been impossible during their time in Heinrich's brothel, where constant fear and systematic exploitation had made emotional intimacy a dangerous luxury neither could afford. Breathe deeply and appreciate your emotional security as we learn that these conversations between mother and daughter became opportunities for Margrete to process her own experiences while preparing Anna for the challenges she might face as an educated woman in a society that often viewed female intelligence with suspicion. Margrete shared hard-won wisdom about reading people's motivations, protecting oneself from manipulation, and maintaining dignity even when others sought to diminish or exploit it. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete's storytelling served multiple purposes, healing her own psychological wounds by giving narrative shape to chaotic experiences, educating Anna about potential dangers and survival strategies, and preserving important knowledge that might help other women facing similar challenges. Feel thankful for your ability to process trauma as we learn that these conversations became a form of informal therapy that helped both women make meaning from suffering. Feel grateful for your safety as we discover that the convent's protection extended beyond physical shelter to include emotional and spiritual sanctuary that allowed both Margrete and Anna to develop aspects of their personalities that had been suppressed during their time under Heinrich's control. They could express curiosity, creativity, and independent thought without fear of punishment or exploitation. Rest in the knowledge of your growth as we learn that Margrete surprised herself by discovering talents and interests that had remained hidden during years of focusing solely on survival. Her needlework evolved into genuine artistry that enhanced the beauty of religious vestments and altar cloths. Her insights into human nature, sharpened by years of observing people in vulnerable moments, proved valuable for counseling work with other traumatized women. Feel thankful for your development as we understand that Anna's personality blossomed within the convent's supportive environment, revealing not only intellectual gifts, but also emotional intelligence, leadership abilities, and a fierce commitment to justice that reflected her mother's influence. The nuns observed that she showed particular compassion for other children, who arrived at the convent after experiencing various forms of abuse or abandonment. Breathe deeply and appreciate your choices as we learn that Anna's growing awareness of social injustice was shaped both by her mother's stories and by her own observations of how medieval society treated vulnerable individuals. She began to understand that her relatively privileged position within the convent carried responsibilities to help others who lacked similar protection and opportunities. Let your muscles relax as we discover that Margrete watched Anna's moral development with a complex mixture of pride and concern. Feel grateful for your idealism as we learn that she wanted her daughter to maintain compassion and commitment to justice, while also developing the practical wisdom necessary to navigate a world that often punished those who challenged existing power structures too directly. Feel thankful for your future as we understand that Anna's education eventually attracted the attention of a wealthy merchant family in Augsburg who sought a tutor for their own daughters. This position offered not only economic security, but also social respectability that seemed impossible given the circumstances of Anna's birth and early childhood. The opportunity represented vindication of Margrete's sacrifices and evidence that education could indeed transcend social barriers. Rest in the knowledge of your independence as we learn that Anna's departure for her new position was both triumph and loss for Margrete, who had devoted years to preparing her daughter for exactly such opportunities while dreading the inevitable separation. Medieval society offered few models for the kind of mother-daughter relationship they had developed, where education and independence were valued over traditional expectations of female submission and dependence. Feel grateful for your connections as we discover that Anna maintained regular correspondence with Margrete after accepting her teaching position, sharing news about her work, her continued learning, and her growing understanding of how education could serve as a tool for social change. These letters became treasured possessions for Margrete, evidence that their relationship had successfully transcended the constraints that had shaped its early years. Breathe deeply and appreciate your legacy as we learn that Anna's success as a tutor led to additional opportunities, including marriage to a merchant's clerk who valued her intelligence and moral character more than conventional concerns about social background. This marriage represented another step away from the stigma that had marked their family's earlier experiences and toward full integration into respectable medieval society. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete's final years were marked by quiet satisfaction in Anna's achievements and growing recognition within the convent community of her own contributions to their mission of providing sanctuary and support to vulnerable women. Feel thankful for your recognition as we learn that the nuns came to view her not as a reformed sinner requiring continued supervision, but as a valued colleague whose experience and wisdom enhanced their ability to serve others. Feel grateful for your peace as we discover that Margrete's death in 1367 was marked by genuine mourning from the entire convent community, who had witnessed her transformation from desperate refugees to respected community member. Her funeral was attended not only by the nuns, but also by many of the women she had counseled and supported over the years, creating a gathering that testified to the positive impact one person could have, despite beginning from circumstances of extreme disadvantage. Rest in the knowledge of your impact as we learn that Anna honored her mother's memory by continuing to support the convent's work with vulnerable women, while also establishing a small fund to provide education for children from difficult backgrounds. This initiative represented a practical extension of Margrete's values and demonstrated how individual acts of courage and compassion could create positive change that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. Feel thankful for historical memory as we understand that Margrete's story was preserved not in official chronicles, but in the informal oral tradition maintained by the convent community, where it became part of the collective wisdom that guided their approach to helping other women escape exploitation and rebuild their lives. Her example provided both inspiration and practical guidance for subsequent generations of religious women committed to social justice. Breathe deeply and appreciate your dignity as we learn that the broader historical context of Margrete's life included thousands of similar stories of women who faced exploitation, violence, and social marginalization while maintaining their essential humanity and finding ways to protect their families and create meaning from suffering. Their collective experiences remind us that individual resilience and mutual support have always been crucial resources for surviving systemic injustice. Let your muscles relax as we discover that the medieval system of regulated prostitution that shaped Margrete's early experiences eventually evolved in response to changing economic conditions, religious movements, and social attitudes. Feel grateful for social progress as we learn that later centuries saw the development of more sophisticated understanding of the economic and social factors that make individuals vulnerable to exploitation. Feel thankful for your protections as we understand that modern efforts to address trafficking and exploitation build upon centuries of gradual recognition that protecting vulnerable individuals requires comprehensive approaches addressing economic inequality, gender discrimination, and social marginalization, rather than simply criminalizing or regulating particular behaviors. Rest in the knowledge of your value as we reflect on how Margrete's commitment to Anna's education and independence anticipated later movements for women's rights and opportunities. Her recognition that education could provide tools for escaping cycles of exploitation demonstrated insights that would eventually become central to efforts promoting gender equality and social justice. Feel grateful for your opportunities as we consider how Anna's success as an educated woman contributed to gradual changes in medieval attitudes toward female intellectual capacity and social potential. Her example helped expand understanding of what women could achieve when provided with education, support, and opportunities to develop their talents. Breathe deeply and appreciate your freedom as we learn that the friendship networks Margrete developed with other women, first in Heinrich's brothel and later in the convent, represented forms of solidarity and mutual aid that provided crucial resources for survival and resistance. These relationships demonstrated that even in highly constrained circumstances, people could create communities of support that sustained hope and enabled positive change. Let your breathing slow as we understand that Margrete's story illustrates both the brutal realities of medieval life for vulnerable women and the possibilities for transformation that could emerge when individuals found access to safety, community, and meaningful work. Feel thankful for your safety as we recognize that her experiences remind us to value and protect the social institutions and legal frameworks that enable people to escape exploitation and rebuild their lives. Feel grateful for your voice as we discover that recovering stories like Margrete's from historical archives represents an ongoing commitment to understanding the past from the perspective of ordinary people rather than focusing exclusively on political events and elite experiences. These efforts help us recognize patterns of struggle and resistance that continue to shape contemporary efforts for social justice. Rest in the knowledge of your agency as we learn that Margrete's individual choices, from her decision to escape Heinrich's brothel to her commitment to Anna's education, demonstrate how personal courage and determination can create positive change, even within systems designed to prevent it. Her example reminds us that individual actions matter, and that seemingly small choices can have far-reaching consequences. Feel thankful for your support systems as we understand that the convent community's decision to provide sanctuary to Margrete and Anna reflected religious and ethical commitments that transcended narrow economic calculations. Their willingness to invest in transformation and redemption created possibilities that changed not only two individual lives, but also influenced how subsequent generations approached questions of social responsibility and human dignity. Breathe deeply and appreciate your potential as we reflect on how Margrete's story connects to ongoing contemporary challenges related to economic inequality, gender-based violence, and social marginalization. Her experiences remind us that protecting vulnerable individuals requires sustained commitment to creating economic opportunities, legal protections, and social support systems that address root causes rather than simply managing symptoms. Let your muscles relax as we consider how the distance between Margrete's constrained choices and our contemporary freedoms represents the accumulated efforts of countless individuals who refused to accept that exploitation and injustice were inevitable features of human society. Feel grateful for progress as we recognize that the rights and opportunities many of us take for granted were secured through generations of struggle and sacrifice. As we return from medieval Nördlingen, perhaps we can carry with us something more than just another historical tale to ease us into sleep. Margrete's story speaks across 7 centuries to remind us that the distance between her circumstances and our comfortable beds reflects not inevitable progress, but specific choices made by countless individuals who decided that human dignity matters more than efficiency, that education should be available regardless of social background, and that every person deserves opportunities to develop their potential and protect their families. Her journey from Heinrich's brothel to the convent sanctuary demonstrates that even in the darkest historical moments, individual courage and community support could create possibilities for transformation and hope. The love she shared with Anna, the friendships she developed with other vulnerable women, and the respect she eventually earned within the religious community remind us that human connections can provide meaning and sustenance even in circumstances designed to isolate and dehumanize. Margrete's fierce commitment to Anna's education, despite the risks and sacrifices this required, reflects a form of resistance that challenged medieval assumptions about women's capacities and social roles. Her recognition that literacy and learning could provide tools for escaping cycles of exploitation anticipated later movements for educational opportunity and gender equality that continue to shape our contemporary world. The networks of mutual aid that sustained Margrete and other women in similar circumstances demonstrate the power of solidarity to provide practical assistance and emotional support when official institutions fail to protect vulnerable individuals. These informal communities of care created resources for survival and transformation that enabled some women to escape exploitation while supporting others in maintaining dignity and hope during periods of constraint. The convent community's decision to offer sanctuary to Margrete and Anna reflected religious and ethical commitments that recognized the possibility for redemption and transformation, even when society had written people off as irredeemably damaged or shameful. Their willingness to invest in second chances created opportunities that changed individual lives while also modeling approaches to social responsibility that influenced subsequent generations. Margrete's story reminds us that historical progress toward greater justice and equality has never been automatic or inevitable. The legal protections, social services, and economic opportunities that many of us now take for granted were secured through the efforts of countless individuals who refused to accept that exploitation and marginalization were permanent features of human society. Her experiences also illuminate ongoing contemporary challenges related to economic vulnerability, gender-based violence, and social stigma that continue to affect millions of people around the world. The patterns of exploitation that characterized Heinrich's brothel, debt bondage, isolation from family and community, systematic extraction of labor and profit from vulnerable individuals, persist in various forms that require sustained attention and comprehensive responses. The educational opportunities that transformed Anna's life circumstances remind us of the continuing importance of ensuring that all children have access to learning that develops their intellectual potential and provides tools for economic independence and social participation. Margrete's recognition that education could serve as a pathway to freedom and dignity anticipates contemporary understanding of education as both a human right and a crucial resource for addressing poverty and inequality. The friendship and mutual support that sustained Margrete through trauma and transition demonstrate the continuing importance of community connections and social networks that provide both practical assistance and emotional sustenance during difficult periods. Her relationships with other women, from the shared survival strategies developed in Heinrich's brothel to the collaborative work within the convent community, illustrate how solidarity and mutual aid create resources for resilience and resistance. Margrete's gradual healing from the psychological wounds inflicted by years of exploitation reminds us that recovery from trauma is possible, but requires safety, time, meaningful work, and supportive relationships. Her ability to find purpose in helping other women facing similar challenges demonstrates how survivors can transform their experiences into resources for serving others while continuing their own healing process. The respect Margrete eventually earned within the convent community reflects the human capacity for growth, transformation, and redemption that transcends the circumstances of individual backgrounds or past experiences. Her example challenges us to recognize the full humanity and potential of people whose life circumstances or choices might seem foreign to our own experience. Sleep now, dear listener, and remember that individual acts of courage, compassion, and resistance matter deeply in creating the kind of world where all people can live with dignity and hope. Margrete's story reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, human connections can provide light, education can open possibilities, and communities of care can sustain transformation that ripples across generations. Until we meet again in another quiet corner of history, may your dreams carry the knowledge that the freedoms and opportunities you enjoy were secured through the struggles of countless individuals who believed that every person deserves protection, respect, and the chance to develop their potential in safety and community. If you found comfort in this journey through history's shadows, please consider subscribing to join our community of gentle souls who believe the most important stories are often the hardest ones to hear. Like and share if this tale has touched your heart, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something magical about knowing our little corner of history reaches around the world to bring people together in understanding and compassion. Good night, and may your sleep be as peaceful as Anna's eventual security, as restorative as Margrete's healing sanctuary, and as hopeful as the educational opportunities that continue to transform lives across the centuries.